Wall Street doesn't want you to see how Bitcoin and crypto are really valued. It's no longer by Twitter hype or what your favorite influencer is saying the price is going to be. And once you understand the models that institutions use, the game looks completely different. You stop playing on retail time and you begin to think and act like an institution. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down 3 valuation models that institutions use behind closed doors to map the pace of the markets. And let me tell you, these are no longer basic chart patterns. These are mathematical frameworks that show adoption curve, network value, and reflexive cycles. And when you take these models and you overlay them against Bitcoin, against Ethereum, and against Solana, the results are shocking. The first model we're going to be discussing today is known as Diffusion. And if you've had friends or family or know anyone that is an avid technology investor, then perhaps this chart is very familiar to them. Why? Because this chart is great at mapping technology adoption over time. This same model was used to map the adoption of iPhones and of things like the internet. And now we can utilize it to map adoption curves and price of assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum. And that dashed line is going to be new adoption over time. And what you can see here, it peaks relatively quickly compared to the blue line, and it drops relatively quickly compared to the blue line. While the solid blue line is total adoption over time. And it's a little more steady in its growth, and eventually it plateaus once that technology hits market saturation or majority of the total addressable market. The second model we'll be talking about is known as Metcalfe's law. And this is a great way to model the value of a network. So you can think in terms of social media, how these companies like Meta and Instagram and Twitter have these valuations that they do. Well, a really simple way to model it is using Metcalfe's law. And in simple terms, for every new user that joins the network, its value begins to increase exponentially. So you can think of when the cell phones first came out, if one person in the whole world had a cell phone, that cellular network isn't really valuable because who can you call? Nobody. If 2 people had it, it becomes a little more valuable. 3, 4, 5, exponentially. 5, 10, 15, and then eventually 1 million, 10, and 1 billion. And it's modeled in this exponential growth curve. Now you're probably wondering, how do these last 2 models, Diffusion and Metcalfe's law, relate to crypto? Well, first of all, crypto is a new technology, right? So the Diffusion is excellent for mapping adoption over time. How many people do we think will use crypto rails or Bitcoin as payment or the Solana network in 30 years from now? This is what Diffusion is great for. Okay, so then why Metcalfe's law? Well, because crypto is a payment network, and Metcalfe's law is used when it comes to valuing networks. So it's the same thing with the cell phone. The more people that use Solana day to day, the more value that network accrues. Begin to see where I'm going here. So when we pair these 2 models together, we can get a pretty good idea at where price and adoption is going in the long term. I've been studying the markets for the last 5 years and doing these models professionally for the last year. And from my fund's research, we've been able to produce what I believe to be some pretty accurate price scenarios for both Solana and Bitcoin, which are two of the main holdings for this cycle that we've chosen. And I'll share a few of them with you today. So for Bitcoin, our base case at the end of this cycle, mid-2026, we're looking around $250,000 per Bitcoin. Base case. We have a bear case of 76,000, which we've completely smashed through. And we have an absolute bull case upwards of $300,000 to $400,000 per Bitcoin USD. And now when it comes to Solana, this is probably one of my favorite chains due to the UI and UX some of the dApps are producing on that chain, such as Jupiter, mainly Jupiter. It's a phenomenal DEX with lovely UI and UX on their wallets. And I believe it's one of the main drivers of this Solana adoption next to the meme coins and everything like that. And it's our number one L1 pick for the cycle. So price predictions for that, using these two models alone, we've come to a base case of around 600 USD per Solana by the end of 2026. A bear case of around 140, which we've completely smashed through. And then an absolute bull case pushing $1,000 USD per Solana. Now, these models are great at giving valuation targets along a relatively longer time horizon. However, if you've been involved in the markets, especially crypto, you know that there is other major factors that play a role in the week-to-week, month-to-month price swings. Which is why, from my research at my fund, we have decided that it is best to include a reflexivity multiplier on our price bands and implement that multiplier into Diffusion and Metcalfe's law. And basically, reflexivity was this thesis or theory invented by this big investor, George Soros. However, his theory of reflexivity is probably one of the most important things to recognize and understand, especially in crypto markets. And what that does is it takes a base valuation derived from previous models and adds a multiplier effect to it. Now, these multiplier effects come from feedback loops in the market. So a feedback loop would be price supporting narrative, narrative supporting price, to support narrative, to support price, to support narrative. And it spins up this big frenzy of buying pressure. The price goes up, overshooting foundational valuations. The same thing can be said from the downside. Now, this chart here are some visuals of varying degrees of reflexivity multipliers. Now, why is this important? Well, because in crypto, the market is so shallow right now that it's very easy to spin up these feedback loops and overshoot and undershoot from median price valuation. Okay? And it's important to understand this so you can begin to recognize when these feedback loops are beginning to occur in the market and adjust risk and position accordingly. Now, here's a great visual of some of these reflexivity multipliers overlaid against a vanilla Bass diffusion adoption curve over time to show you what these overshoots and undershoots in price could look like over a long-term trajectory. And what you can see here is that as we get closer to the top of the diffusion chart, So the market begins to saturate and the reflexivity multipliers begin to swing quite violently, both to the upside and to the downside, which is very interesting compared to when we started at the bottom of the S-curve of the diffusion model. The reflexivity bands are quite tight. So implementing this can give us solid price bands and areas to watch where we can trim, adjust risk, or fully exit positions along this adoption curve. Now, if you guys are interested in learning more about this, I'm opening a few discovery calls. Drop a comment down below if you're interested, and I'll reach out and we can set it up. There, I'll be helping you learn more about these models, how to apply them to your investing, and helping you establish parameters to input into these models to give you the best price valuations for your specific assets. Not to mention, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like, drop a comment down below regardless if you guys have learned something, or if you have any questions, love to chat. As always, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to build a channel, help educate you and myself about finance along this journey, and I will see you guys in the next video.